Let's review. Okay, I'm gonna have to look this way while I review. So, I have to admit, I'm not usually a fan of open world games, as many of the tropes associated with them don't hold my attention. A lot of the ones I've tried will have a strong start and then basically say to the player, okay, go, do what you want, explore this massive world. But then the problem with a lot of these worlds is they are so large that the game creators have to reuse a lot of the assets, which make the worlds samey and boring. Skyrim does fall into this, but only a little, with a lot of the dungeons feeling vastly interchangeable with only minor differences in the theme. Maybe one's a spider cave and one's a Drummere ruin. Overall though, the overworld feels both massive and rewarding to explore. I think it's safe to say that Skyrim set a bar for open world RPG style games, and while that bar has since been raised by titles such as The Witcher 3, it's also safe to say that Skyrim started an open world craze that to all intents and purposes we're still in the grips of to this day. Therefore, it's hard to argue with the pedigree and quality of Skyrim. The main mission is ridiculously short, which is disappointing for such a massive and originally expensive game. The side missions do a hell of a lot to make up for this though, and I feel the side missions are really where Skyrim's strength lies, with many meaty quest lines and a myriad of shorter interests on the way. The DLCs add an enormous amount to this and provide large enclosed story experiences that I appreciate a great deal, and I must say I recommend playing the special edition to allow you to enjoy the full experience, even if the Dragonborn DLC is a bit disappointing when compared to the amazing Dawnguard DLC. I have to say, I'm glad the side missions are so compelling, as this minimises on the need for grinding, as instead of, this is too strong for us, let's go do some grinding, the only response I found in my playthrough was, this is too strong for us, let's go do some other quests for a bit. This, with the fact that the game regularly points you in the direction of new areas to explore, keeps the player entertained while also making the world feel real and believable. This brings me to the auxiliary intrigues, namely professions and proficiencies. I have to say I was wholly disappointed with these. Cooking, for example, is entirely a waste of time and is no fun whatsoever. I ended up doing alchemy, but honestly I mostly forced myself to try it because I wanted to try a profession. Even still, I found it confusing, frustrating and boring, with very little reward for the time I invested. I suspect this is the same for the other professions, with things like blacksmithing providing armour that you could just as easily quest for in the same amount of time. But even getting to that point is extremely difficult, as the game gives very little if any instruction as far as I can tell, which overall gives the player very little incentive or reason to explore these options. One thing that these proficiencies does do right is that they do add to the world and the player's immersion, and overall I think the main thing I took away from Skyrim was just how immersive and beautiful the world is. The graphics may be just a little dated for today's standards, but I maintain that this is a great looking game that genuinely made me stop to look around the landscape on several occasions. This is what kept me coming back for more, is why this is a game that is worth playing or possibly even replaying, and is definitely why this game has been cemented as a classic, famously available on almost every platform known to man. Having said that, there are several things that try hard to ruin this immersion. The voice acting is pretty poor, although not terrible, with the same few voice actors putting on a myriad of similar but different voices with varying results. The fact that all the guards have pretty much the same voice lines is amusing but ridiculous. Pretty wonky too, with followers continuing with mundane tasks and getting in the way during what are supposed to be emotional cutscenes. And much to my mirth, characters go straight into monologue mere milliseconds after being woken up by the protagonist. A lot of these little things do take away from the immersion somewhat, but generally don't break it, and are forgivable, especially when you factor in the age of the game. While the combat, which is generally feels fair, is also pretty basic and janky, with little flair required. What I cannot forgive, however, are the plethora of bugs and glitches scattered throughout the game. I understand that many of these are quite amusing, and what I have gotten from chat pretty much unilaterally when I voiced my concerns about the bugs has been, it's Bethesda, it's expected. This is wholly unacceptable for a game that people are paying money for, and is downright ridiculous for a game that's been out for as long as Skyrim, especially when you factor in the fact that I purposefully downloaded only one mod for this game, which is titled the Unofficial Skyrim Patch. Keep in mind that it isn't the people that made the patch that I'm complaining about, it's the bug-addled original game that shouldn't even need an unofficial patch, and it's still bug-ridden even after their considerable efforts. If it wasn't for these regular bugs, this game would be exponentially better. One thing of note that did cause a lot of frustration was the map, especially in dungeons with more than one level. It was worse than useless on some occasions, and when a quest had more than one objective, became nothing less than infuriating, with confusing and contradictory waypoints telling me to go out of an exit and then immediately to go back in. With all these things said, I'd still recommend playing this game. Not because it's a classic, but because it became a classic for a reason. It's something I never thought I would say. A truly enthralling open world adventure full of content to be explored, which, with only a relatively small suspension of disbelief, comes to life in the world, characters, and stories created to be told.